This is a very difficult video to make because I have just had one of the worst games, I think, in at least over a year, while I was playing with my rating climb account against Charlie, who is almost 1400 rating, but I think he is a little bit stronger. He only made his account very recently and he is basically winning all of his games. But I still wanted to share this game with you, even though it was quite a terrible game, because most YouTubers actually hide all of their losses and they just don't talk about it and they act as if they play perfect chess. And I play very good chess most of the time, but sometimes I also mess up. So let's take a look at the game so you can learn from my mistakes and yeah, don't play like I played in this game. Um, so my opponent played e4. I was actually recording this because I wanted to do another video on the Owens defense. So pawn to b6, they take the center and I play bishop to b7, which attacks the pawn on e4. White then defends it and I play pawn to e6. This is all theory, I would say, for the Owens defense, and then you play bishop to b4. I recently made a video about this. This is actually a very good opening if you are looking for something that you can play against everything. So that is why I wanted to record another video about it. They play bishop to d3 because they have to protect the pawn. I mean, the pawn is under attack and the knight is also pinned. So basically they don't really have a choice. They have to protect it, so they protect it. And then I attack it one more time. And then they push. And I was a little bit confused here on what to do. There are basically two plans. You can play knight to e4 or knight to d5, and in general what you have to do here is you have to play knight to e4, and I kind of knew this, but I still didn't play it in the game, which is strange. But the reason why you play this is because we have double pressure on the knight. We also have pressure on this d2 square, so if they ever try to protect with the bishop, for example, you can just take it, and if they take, you can actually take here with your bishop, and then that's basically fine. Instead I played this move, knight to d5, which of course it's not terrible. This is basically a different way of playing it, but yeah, it just messes up basically the entire strategy behind the opening. So you don't want to play knight here if you are playing the Owens defense. So keep that in mind. My opponent defended here with the bishop to d2, and that's when I realized that I was basically in a position that I didn't really know, or at least I've never really had this, because this is not what I usually play. You should have your knight here so that you can take that bishop. It's still not over, of course, for black. Black still has some chances, but I misplayed this because I took here on c3, which usually makes sense in this opening, but in this particular variation it doesn't. It's usually better if you go, for example, something like this, and then you take on c3, and then you go for this line, basically, and then you can even take the bishop. But I basically messed up, so I played knight here, and then I took. And then here is where I started to realize that somehow things have gone wrong, and I didn't really know this exact position, and I basically instantly castled without thinking. Which of course is a very huge blunder. I would normally never play this, but I played it here, and mistakes happen. And if you don't know why this is a blunder, this allows a very simple tactic from my opponent. They can of course play a Greek gift. They can sack the bishop, they can go in with a check, and then if I go back, they can play queen here, and basically that is unstoppable checkmate, and we are at move 9. That's not great, and I basically have to sack my queen if I want to stay in the game, but that's also, of course, game over. A tough position to be in, but my opponent actually didn't see it. Instead, they tried to play for another attack. So they played knight to g5, attacking my pawn. I pushed, so they had to move their knight. But again, this is already, I think, a very, very difficult position. Even this move, which the engine says it's a miss, of course it's a miss because they had a Greek gift. It's already very difficult for black to defend this. The best move is probably this, which I didn't play, which is pawn to f5, because you block the bishop, and if they take en passant, you can basically take with your knight, and you are protecting this h7 pawn. I played pawn h6, which the engine says is a mistake. I think it's actually a fine move, but the problem is that sometimes they can play this crazy move, knight h7, going into your position, and if you then move your rook, things are getting crazy. For example, this is already pretty much unstoppable checkmate again, but it's very difficult to see from the white side. I think that this is what you have to play. It's not very obvious, at least not to me, that this is the best play, because what if I go here with the king? Yeah, the engine is screaming this is +4, but I don't think it's so easy. Um, and he played queen here, basically trying to be tricky, because if I had captured this, that would be blundering a checkmate in 1, which of course I didn't play. But here it's already very tough to find any defensive plan for black, because you are in a lot of trouble. Because taking this leads to checkmate in 1, pushing this pawn leads to a losing position as well, because they can take here, and apparently this is a checkmate in 8 if you sack your queen, otherwise it's a checkmate in 2. Playing f6, which I also thought about, is also losing, because they can play queen to g6, and then they still, it's actually a brilliant move, wow, and then they still would have the checkmate, or at least I think they would still have the checkmate, right? Because they have this check, you go here, and then I guess they just have this check with the bishop, you have to go there, and then basically it is checkmate. So I calculated that. And I wanted to show you this moment. Where are we? We are here, because this was actually one of the more interesting moments from the game, where I used an important calculation technique, which is known as the elimination method. So the elimination method is one of the best strategies you can use when you are defending. And it basically says that if you are defending, it's quite easy to find the best move if you use this method, because all we are going to do is eliminate the moves which are immediately losing. So for example, this is a checkmate in 1. This also leads to checkmate. And this would also be a blunder and would also be losing to this brilliant move, which I calculated, queen to g6. So using the elimination method, I can see that, okay, 1, 2, 3, all of these 3 moves are basically already not playable anymore, and then you can avoid making the worst moves and try to find the best defensive moves. I think probably one of the best moves here is still to play pawn to f5 to block the bishop, and if they take, you can just take with the knight, and you are fine. Plus you also have this attack, which I didn't play. Instead I played another move which is actually not incredibly great, but it's also not so terrible, which was bishop here. My idea was basically, if we just exchange the bishops, yeah, these 3 pieces will probably never be able to checkmate me or do anything, so that's fine. I think my opponent should have probably played pawn to c4, and then I would have had to move the knight, and that is still a difficult position to defend. Apparently they are still winning if they play something crazy like knight to h7. If I move the rook, and then they start crashing. So very difficult to defend from black. I basically put myself into unnecessary amounts of trouble. But yeah, as I said, this was not my sharpest game that I've played in a while. They played the knight back here to e4, and I was very happy, because the moment I saw that, I knew that basically I had survived. And I survived this incredibly terrible opening play that I played. This was one of the worst openings I think I have played. Not because the opening is bad, but because I just played a terrible opening in a long time. And this is already fine for black. And here I was confident that I was actually still going to win the game, or I might still win the game, because white doesn't have anything anymore. I mean, the knight is not going into the position, and it's never going to happen. Even if they crash here, yeah, they don't really have anything. And I also have the incredibly strong move here, pawn to f5, which I played, which I should have played earlier, which attacks the knight. And basically the knight has to just go all the way back, or they have to take, which they did. And they could also move back with the knight, but you can see that basically, yeah, there is nothing in this position for white anymore. It's completely gone, their attack. He took en passant, which I think is also not the best plan, because now basically I can just force another trade of pieces. And at this point, I had realized during the game that I messed up, and that I was probably going to be checkmated, and that it was going to be a terrible game, but I tried to still play my very best chess and try to make a comeback. So that is why I was fighting here. I think this game is perfect, honestly, to show defense skills and to show resilience as well, to try to keep fighting even if you made a mistake. So they played the queen here, which I think is a bit of a strange move. Yeah, not that there's anything spectacular that's way better, but it's just a bunch of trades. And then I played queen f6, basically trying to go for a queen trade plus also attacking this. And I thought we were going to get a variation like this, where I probably play knight c6, and this is about an equal endgame. It depends here, I think, on the endgame skills of both players. The player with the best endgame skills, which I thought would be me, since I am playing somebody lower rated. will win this. Instead, he played a queen to g3, protecting, which I didn't calculate, but it's still a fine move. And here I think we have some very important endgame lesson that I can teach you. So this position is equal in material, and in my opinion, we are already somewhat in the endgame. You could say it's the late middle game. I think this is the endgame. And there is not really a difference in material, it's equal. But there is a difference in the pieces on the board. They have a bishop, I have a knight. And this means that if the position is extremely open, meaning no pawns in the center, this bishop will turn into a monster. I can already imagine if these were not here, there would be something like bishop c3, attack the queen, attack the pawn, maybe go for checkmate on this square, actually. Yep. So I have to keep the center locked up, basically. That is when my knight will be superior. So I played this move, which I think is excellent, pawn to d6. Because if they castle, you can see that the center is closed, and it's probably going to stay closed for a while, and I can play pawn to e5 as well and close it forever, basically. I think the best way for white to fight back would have been to play e5, which would lead to some trades, and then maybe queen here. But you can see my goal was basically to block this diagonal for his bishop, and then go into the endgame with my knight. That was the plan. So I think that was an excellent plan. But he didn't do that. He castled, so then we got into this position. Here he can also take, but I think it's still going to lead to the same thing. Basically, his bishop is somewhat out of the game. But he pushed. And the moment he pushed, I knew that he probably didn't really know how to play this endgame and that I was going to win this game, even though I had played a very terrible start of the game. Because now, if we look at this position, it's completely closed, meaning the bishop is a dead piece. And my knight is going to be an incredible piece, like just 2 moves, and you can see that this knight is now a monster. It's attacking all of those squares, all of the light squares. They only have the dark squared bishop. So it's very tough for my opponent here. They played f3 to protect this, alright. And then I played knight to b3, basically going for this fork. And I also decided to trade my knight for the bishop. And one thing that I was thinking about here is I basically have 2 options. I can either choose to grind out this endgame with a knight versus bishop, which I think would be what I would do if this was an over-the-board game that I wanted to win. Because you can win this, because we have a knight versus the bishop, and the bishop is bad and the knight is good. But it's going to take quite a long time of playing the best endgame moves, one after the other. And I think with 3 minutes on the clock in a game that I should have basically lost like 3 times already, I didn't want to test my luck. So I was just thinking, okay, we are going to trade. The bishop was supposed to be a better endgame piece anyways. And then we got this position. And I played a5. And my main idea was here that this should be a draw, I think. The engine is saying it's a little bit better for black, but I was thinking this should be a draw. Why? Well, white doesn't have a single way to really break open the position. I mean, this is never going to happen. This can't happen right now, and if he tries to play it, I can play queen here like I did and basically lock the position. And if he takes, which I think that was the move I expected, this is of course a completely equal endgame because nothing is happening here. No pawns will be pushed, and even if they push here on the king side, basically, yeah, I can double up. Let's say they play this, we can take. I don't know how they would take. Maybe this, or that would even be losing. Maybe this, and this is still an equal endgame. So I calculated here that I would be able to go for an equal endgame, but he avoided the queen trade, which told me again that he was not the strongest endgame player, because now I have an infiltration with my queen. And suddenly I think black is winning, so I basically went from a completely losing game to a winning endgame. Because the queen can infiltrate, and we can start grabbing up all of these 3 pawns. It's already difficult, because how do you defend this pawn? I basically think you can't defend it, because you can't move this rook, and this rook would be captured. So he pushed it, which of course still leads to a loss. I'm not going to cover every line here, because the endgame is quite long. We played 61 moves, and I'm only at move 25 right now. But I'm going to show you just some of the main plans. My plan here was just, let's attack 2 pawns. Engine says it's an accuracy. I think it's a fine move. They give a check, and then they play this. I think what he should have done was probably try to attack this. I take on c4, and he can try to hold on, basically. That is what he should try to do. But he tried to be aggressive here in a position where he is completely losing. I can capture this. I could have captured this actually as well. I think that was a little bit better. But we got a bunch of trades going on. And then in the end, you can see that basically black is still better here because the material is equal, but I can just snatch this pawn. They can take this pawn, I can take that pawn, and if they take this pawn, I think I can just take on e4, and I am still up a pawn in this endgame. Yeah, I think that's fine. Engine says it's an accuracy, okay, but you can play out this endgame and you will have a fine endgame. But these positions are very difficult. I won't go through every single line. But here I think I started messing up a little bit. I wanted to give some checks and then grab some pawns, but suddenly, yeah, white also has this pawn which is very close to promotion. And I think it's almost impossible to stop it, if it's not even impossible. But of course, if you can see the clock, I also had less than 1 minute because I basically had to use, I think, almost 6 minutes in the opening and early middle game to make sure I didn't lose on the spot. So we played out this endgame. We went for some trades. I attacked this pawn. Now I have two attackers. And here I think he played one of the most incredible moves. I completely didn't expect this. So I think here black is, of course, better because we have the extra pawn. But this should be a draw with perfect play. But it's difficult. I only have 46 seconds on the clock. But he played this move, rook f8, which I think was very interesting. The moment I saw this, I thought I actually missed something again. Because, of course, taking here, I lose my queen. So I had to move my king. And then I saw that there was not really any checks he could give me, so it doesn't really matter. Except this one, but I can still block with my queen. And then he traded. And this endgame, if you don't know this endgame is a draw. Because I will not be able to promote this pawn. But of course, it is black who is pushing, and it is white who has to do the best defense. So it's still difficult to defend this from the white side. So he attacked my pawn, I protected it. Some inaccuracies, some mistakes. Basically here he dropped the second pawn. I don't know why. He had 2 minutes on the clock and he just gave away a pawn with a check. And this is when I knew, okay, I am going to win this endgame now. I am going to win this endgame in a position that basically I should have lost 5 times already. I don't know how many times, but I should have already lost this. There are some inaccuracies, some mistakes, some misses, but honestly, I think what I played is the most sensible strategy. There were basically faster ways to win, which I won't cover, but this is the simple strategy. You go for this setup, and if white plays any move like this, they are immediately losing because check with the rook, and then you promote to a queen, and now you are winning. So he knew that, or he saw that, and then he played the king here, which is the best move. Because now I'm stuck basically. I can't move my rook or I lose my pawn. And yeah, that's the end of the story. But of course, I still have 2 extra pawns and I can start using my king, as I did, to try to win this. And now he is doing a defense job, so I decided to move my rook. And white only has one option, which is to take, and go into this endgame, which is of course completely winning for black, because we have 2 extra pawns. Yeah, and there shouldn't be any difficulties in winning this position. So we have 2 extra pawns, we should win this. So I just played some moves. I already, by the way, only had 20 seconds on the clock. So this was a very tough position to defend. He tried his best. I was playing this, thinking, okay, we are going to go for the endgame and we are going to win here. And of course, this position is completely winning for black. All you have to do is basically give a check to the king, make them move, and I think you can just go in and you can start pushing and you will make a queen. 17 seconds on the clock, so it's still difficult, but you should be winning here. So I was about to win here, but instead of giving this check, I played the most terrible move possible. Under time pressure, of course, otherwise I would never miss this. But there is a simple threat here. He has a back rank checkmate. And I played pawn to h4. And that's it. That was the end of the game.